Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Stutz, the director of the Royal Gorge Regional Museum History Center, and thank you so much for joining us for our kickoff presentation for the city's sesquicentennial year. Throughout the year, the museum, along with the rest of the city, will be holding various events to commemorate the 150-year history of this community. This month's theme is geology. And we are lucky to have with us today Joshua Broussard, who is our BLM, Bureau of Land Management Paleo Liaison, to discuss the amazing geological history that built Cañon City. For those of you directly in the audience today, we ask you to please silence your cell phones during the presentation and to reserve your questions to the end of the program. And for those of you joining us via Zoom, if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat feature and we will address them at the end of the program as well. And you can also email us your questions at historycenter@canyoncity.org. We are also recording this presentation this afternoon, which we will make available on our YouTube page and on channel 191. And with that, I will now turn it over to Joshua.
All right, good afternoon. And this is more people than I thought would show up. I really do appreciate that. This is really cool. So today we're going to be talking about the geology that built Cañon City, and we're going to talk about a little bit of everything. I'm not going to get too detailed in some of these things, but I do implore you to go look them up for yourselves because this stuff is really awesome. It is on, hang on. Oh. See, this is why I'm a geologist. Technology just does. I work with rocks. I'm a paid caveman. All right, let me turn it off, turn it back on. Jiggle the batteries or something. Well, the receiver's in the back, and it's not. Thank you. Yes, okay. Awesome, finally. So just an introduction to myself. My name is Joshua Broussard, as Lisa introduced me. I'm originally from the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. If you can't tell by the accent, I'm not from here. I did my undergraduate studies and graduate studies in Mississippi State University and the surrounding Starkville area, as this is portrayed. Mississippi, we have just sedimentary rock. The only igneous or metamorphic rock we have is 2,000 feet down, and it's an extinct volcano underneath the city's capital of Jackson. So this is all sedimentary rock, and this is all Cretaceous age, and we have really similar stuff to this in Cañon City as well as a bunch of other really awesome things in Cañon City. So like I said, I'm really familiar with sedimentary rocks and marine invertebrates. This is all marine deposits. This is all limestone and sandstone. This is actually the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary, the second largest mass extinction in the rock record. And there's me again having fun being dirty. So being in the South, this is a lot of what my field work consists of, is stuff like this. So very different from here. This is not my first time in Colorado. This is back in 2017. This is in the Gunnison, Pitkin area, actually. This is an old mining town at the top of a mountain. That's me, obviously, standing in one of the few buildings left there. And a few months ago, I revisited there. It's pretty cool getting to go back to that place, and still there. I like doing things like being outdoors and camping. If I didn't, I don't know why I wouldn't be a geologist. I also just like hiking, having fun, and being a goofball around abandoned mines. And sometimes I do this thing called teaching and public outreach, where I stand very dangerously on rocks and talk to people. So, and then if you're friends with me, yeah, expect me to do stuff like this. I'm in the background of a lot of tourist photos at Garden of the Gods, just holding a stadia rod. So yeah, expect me to always like do geology stuff even whenever we're out having fun. So just some basic concepts of geology. I'm sure a lot of you learned this before. So we have what's called the principle of uniformitarianism, and that's a big word, but basically what it means is the present is the key to the past. And it was proposed by James Hutton, who is one of the founding members of geology. Here he is looking all cool with a thing in his ear. And basically what this means is we can use modern analogs, modern evidence to interpret things in the geologic past. So this right here looks just like if we went to the beach today and we saw those ripples along the bottom. That's what that is. That's ripple marks that have been preserved in rock records. So we know that at one point this was underwater. And sure enough, this is part of the Dakota Formation, which makes up a lot of the stuff around here in Cañon City. And it was marine deposit. We can look at this, which is actually in the corner of the room back behind y'all. That is a large dinosaur bone, and it looks similar to bones today. So that's basically what uniformitarianism is. We just use modern analogs to determine things in the past. Geology is just a big game of detective. Rock cycle, everybody should know this one. Sedimentary rocks are made up of sediments like sand. Igneous rocks are made up of cooled lava or magma. Metamorphic rocks are whenever we get either one of those rocks subjected to heat and pressure and twisted and done all kinds of other things to them, kind of like what we have a lot in the Rocky Mountains. In geologic time, I know this is a lot of stuff on one slide, but trust me, I'm going to explain this. The way we determine geologic time as a geologist is we consider things in what we call millions of years ago. So when you look at this, this is modern day right here. And as you go down, you're getting older in geologic time until you get all the way to 4.6 billion years ago, the beginning of when the Earth formed. And you see little numbers and they say MA, that means millions of years ago. So whenever I say that the dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago, at the end of the Cretaceous, or 66, 65, around there, that's literally how many millions of years ago from today it happened. Kind of to put that into perspective, we have 4.6 million years ago here, and then right in here, about 2.8 billion years ago, we have our first little single cell bacteria. Then we have some more modern stuff with a little bit more cells going on with them. And then we get our Cambrian explosion where we get trilobites and cool fish and primitive cephalopods and stuff. Then we get trees and insects and dinosaurs and mammals, and then we get us like barely right here. I'm gonna use this diagram for the rest of this presentation because it's a really good representation of the geologic time scale. You got your fossils over here, you got your ages really simplistically over here and their ages. So it's just really good visuals. I'm gonna use this one. As far as the Rocky Mountain area, this is basically what happened in the Rocky Mountains as far as geologic time. So you notice you have these little lines that show different events. So we have, oh, little text box getting in my way. Anyway, we have our Precambrian granite, which if you live in this area, you've seen it. It's everywhere. It's that basement granite rock that makes up a lot of the basement of the Rockies. Then we have a lot of marine deposition in the Devonian, Ordovician, whenever it's all underwater. And we'll get to that. I'll show you exactly what I mean that. Then you got the ancestral Rockies uplifted, and then they kind of eroded away, had some other things happen to them. And then we have the Cretaceous Western Interior Seaway. And then we have the modern Rocky Mountain building with the laramide orogeny. Orogeny is just a fancy word for mountain building. And you have this. But one thing I want to point out with this diagram is if you notice there's a few gaps in the time right here. And I'll explain exactly why that's important in just a sec. So the Cañon City area itself throughout geologic time. So this is a diagram that shows kind of how the Rocky Mountains came to be, as well as the Royal Gorge. I know a lot of people have been curious about how long ago that formed. So the Royal Gorge was formed 3 million years ago when the Arkansas River cut out the canyon at 1,250 feet. 1,250 feet canyon. It was a rate of 1 foot every 2,500 years, excuse me. But basically you have, let's see, you have the modern day one, and then you have the ancestral Arkansas River, and then you have the orogeny that created the mountain. So there's that. As far as Cañon City itself, this is what we're seeing with those hogbacks that are surrounding town. So this is a lot of really old Cretaceous layers and some other ones that are even older that have gotten pushed upwards angularly, and now they're outcropping across this area. And that's why we have lots of fossils occur around the hogbacks, as well as some other really important minerals. occurring around some of these more granitic mountains we're seeing. This is a picture I took in Temple Canyon. It just shows you, we see a lot of these angular beds in this area. So these right here, individual beds is what you're seeing, these flat surfaces. Okay. So with Cañon City, we have our geologic time scale, and I mentioned we have some of those gaps in time. This is what's called an unconformity, and this is kind of important in terms of the geology here. So if you notice, we have our Ordovician, and then we have our permanent. So Ordovician is over here on the complete geologic time scale. Then we have a gap, and then we have our Permian Pennsylvanian. Then we have a big gap. The Triassic is completely missing from this area, and it's not that it didn't happen, it did. It's just that everything that was put down in the Triassic deposited just completely eroded away before the Jurassic age sediments were deposited. And that, ooh, my bad. Go back. And we see another one like that. Let's see. Yeah, we see another smaller one up here, but the big one is the Triassic is missing, as well as the Mississippian, Devonian, and Silurian. They're all missing here. And like I said, it's not they didn't happen. It's just that whatever was deposited in those now gone. So that's the unconformity in Cañon City. Some of you might have heard the Great Unconformity in the Grand Canyon. Same concept. There's just geologic time missing in the rock record. So Cañon City, especially for the people who are watching this via Zoom and don't live here, this is the Cañon City area. I'm going to be focusing mainly right in here, mainly not much further than Brookside, because there's a lot here. There really is. So first, we're going to go over the fossils of this area. So during the Ordovician 458 million years ago, this is basically what the Earth looked like. So lots of paleocontinents, I suppose we could call them. These are just tectonic plates that are sort of like what we have today. They're all mostly buried or mostly melted away, but they were all moving around, doing their own thing. So Laurentia is what is now North America. And during this time down here in the Ordovician, it all kind of looked like this. So we have some really early cephalopods, some early fish, some trilobites, these things called Eurepterids, which are awesome. And in the Cañon City area, if you haven't heard of Indian Springs Trace Fossil Site, it's an awesome place. If you get the chance, I highly recommend going and touring it. But what we can find there are probably some of the best trace fossils you can find anywhere in the world. So what a trace fossil is when an animal walks across the ground or swims across it or digs in it to feed, it leaves behind marks, right? Kind of like how if you walk on mud now, you leave behind a footprint. Same concept, but these have been preserved. But what we're getting is not the actual body of the organism preserved. We're getting preservation of its behavior in life. So these are some super early organisms, and you can see you got a trace here. You got where one was walking through the mud here. Some of these are better to see than others. You have a crawling trace here, a Cruziana is what it's called. This is a really excellent one. I love this one. This is a trilobite Cruziana trace. This is where a trilobite crawled across the mud and left its footprints. And you usually don't get things preserved this well. There's a lot more in this rock. I mean, there's just so much in this one boulder, in this one rock. It's just really concentrated stuff. Like, again, this is just so much going on here. And just for, just as an example of what some of these little traces are, like you see some of these little feet marks and some of these little crawling traces, this is pretty much what made most of these. So like I said, this is your Eurepterid. These were sea scorpions. These were a pretty big predator in their time, and they're honestly kind of cool. And some of them got to like 3 feet, so a little terrifying. But this is the trace they left behind usually, and there's different species of them, and you can tell by the different marks they left. And you can see that here at Indian Springs, there's actually a species that is endemic only to this site right here. Trilobites, everybody knows those little things, little bitty bugs. These are cool. These are, let me make sure I don't butcher the name here. Oh, it's double-sided. Find it. Okay, apparently that didn't print. Never mind then. Okay, so these are an early boneless fish. These are pretty common at this site right here. These are your primitive ancestor to horseshoe crabs, modern day horseshoe crabs. And it's kind of cool because where I grew up, we had horseshoe crabs all the time. So let's go forward a little bit in geologic time. Let's go to the Permian, which is still really old. So the Garden of the Gods is actually Permian rock. Some of it occurs around here in Cañon City. It's not super fossiliferous here. There are fossils in it. Occasionally we'll see some of these fossils, these little corals, which I think I have a box of up here. I have some stuff that the people in person can, after the presentation, come look at some of the stuff. But this is basically what it looked like. We still had fish, sharks, all that stuff, but there was a lot of coral around then, including some extinct species like those over there. And after the end of the Permian, the largest mass extinction in known history happened. 90% of all life on Earth went gone. So a lot of things, trilobites went away too, unfortunately. So let's move up to the Jurassic. This is what Cañon City is known for. This is all the giant, cool dinosaurs and the small ones as well. So the Jurassic is a little bit further up in time. And remember, I said the Triassic's missing here, unfortunately, but that's the way it is. So with dinosaurs, these are big words that will be on the test later. So with dinosaurs, we usually split them up into two distinctions of saurischian, which saur means lizard, and ornithian, with ornith means bird. So what this is lizard-hipped and bird-hipped. And we're mainly going to focus on saurischians because most dinosaurs here are like that. And it's kind of a weird misnomer because lizard-hipped dinosaurs and bird-hipped dinosaurs, modern day avians actually are they're part of Saurischia. They're not part of Ornithischia, even though those are called bird-hip. But the reason they're called that is because the structure of their hip is similar to lizards or birds, somewhat. That's how it was originally classified. Usually these are a little bit lower to the ground, ornithians are. So the biggest one that we're going to talk about is Stegosaurus, because that's the state fossil and it was found here. That one's an ornithian. Most of the other ones we're talking about are saurischians. Those are like our sauropods, which are what most people think of when they think of dinosaurs. The big giant ones that walked on four legs with long necks and long tails. Lots of these here, including some that were found for the first time here. Then we have theropods, which are these. They walked on their hind legs and sometimes had short little arms. And the biggest one that a lot of people think of is Allosaurus. That one is from here. That's another dinosaur we find a lot here. And a big important theropod is this right here. This is Archaeopteryx. This was found in Germany. And what's notable about Archaeopteryx is usually when fossils form, all the soft parts usually dissolve away, right? And usually that's why you only get bones preserved, because that's the hard parts. Archaeopteryx is considered to be a transition between theropods and modern birds. It's a really important fossil. I think it's funny that this is now, yeah. Yeah, so avians, yeah, they're from theropoda. So, and it played again, I guess. Uh-oh. Oh, it's looping. Let me go to the next one. Okay, so like I said, fossils are formed from the preservation of hard parts. So what happens is, in order to get a fossil, you have to have something dies, obviously, or it dies, oh God, that's bad. If it dies by being buried, anyway, it's buried. It's going to get buried. And then it gets preserved, and sometimes those shells or those hard parts are remineralized with whatever's in the surrounding sediment. And then it weathers out, and I find it, and yeah, that's how fossils are created. So the big one that is in Cañon City is Garden Park, which is an area north of Cañon right here. And Garden Park is known for the Bone Wars. Actually, let me go back. So Garden Park is north of Cañon, and the reason it gets its name is because back whenever Cañon City was founded, it was founded as a subsidiary town to Cripple Creek and Florence and the other areas around here that were for mining. Garden Park is where a lot of farming was conducted. That's why it got its name, Garden Park. So the Bone Wars, this is a pretty infamous rivalry between two guys, and it started partially here, and a lot of it happened here. So these two dapper looking gentlemen, the one on the left is Othniel Charles Marsh, and the guy with the awesome mustache on the right is Edward Drinker Cope. Both of these men were naturalists and early scientists, and they were actually friends at one point. Cope was in Berlin when he met Marsh, and they hit it off good. They were colleagues. They were both interested in naturalism, basically modern world as well as prehistoric world. And Cope ended up introducing Marsh to a quarry of somebody that he knew, or somebody was finding bones in New Jersey. And Marsh kind of made a deal with the guy to start sending bones to him instead of Cope. And yeah, that's where it started. It kind of started with that. And the other big thing that did it was Cope did this recreation of Elasmosaurus, which was a large reptile from the Cretaceous, marine reptile. He put the head on the tail, and there was some very nasty words exchanged about that. And it was such an embarrassment that Cope tried to buy all the publications of it to no avail. Yeah, so both of them began excavating dinosaurs, or by proxy excavating dinosaurs, in the Garden Park area. So this one is the big one a lot of people know about. It's Marsh Felch Quarry. So Charles Marsh heard through other people that bones were being found in Cañon City. And originally there was some being sold in a curio shop here in town. I've no idea where, but somebody was selling dinosaur bones as petrified wood. So he heard about this and he recruited, make sure I got this one. Yeah, so he recruited this man. This was a guy who lived in Garden Park as a farmer. His name was Marshall P. Felch. He recruited him to start excavating the Marsh Felch Quarry with him, along with a group of other workers. And Felch was pretty well known because he was pretty remarkable in that he came up with newer ways of repackaging and plastering the bones to keep them from being destroyed in transport. It's possible that he learned this whenever he was actually a field doctor in the Civil War. He's actually wearing a medal kind of underneath the text bar there, but he was actually a veteran of the Civil War. Him and his wife both served as doctors. So Marsh and some of his students, which that's pretty awesome photo. They made an expedition out here to kind of check it out themselves at one point. I believe they came out here a couple of times. They weren't out here the whole time. Like I said, they worked via proxy. People would excavate the bones for them, and then they would have them shipped to wherever they're located. Marsh was actually based out of Yale. So the bones were shipped via railway to Yale. Okay, so the quarry itself was excavated from 1877 to 1900. And this is like solid rock. So they're basically breaking up this rock, finding the bones in it. And you can see they got a covered shed here, which they would use for prepping the bones. And they got a cabin and whatnot. But the reason why bones are here at the site is because if you notice this little channel looking thing right here, a little curve right here, this used to be a big stream channel in the Jurassic. So things would die and wash downstream. And this was kind of the bend of a river where they would just get stuck and buried. That's why there's so many concentrated bones in this one spot. Here's another picture of the original quarry right here. Obviously, the buildings are no longer there. There's still like some steel nails in the dirt there from where they were, and you kind of see the outline of where the cabin was. But this is where they stayed for the few years excavating stuff. And this is a figure that Kenneth Carpenter. This was the actual excavations, and I like this because you can actually see the years and what they excavated. So they excavated several holotypes, which a holotype fossil is basically the first of its kind to be described and cataloged. Like I said, this was like the beginning of dinosaur paleontology. So a lot of brand new things were discovered right here in Garden Park. This is an aerial view of it. Google Maps, the relief of what's a hill and what's not is really bad. So it was a little hard to discern what was what. So here's here's the cabin, here's the covered shed, and this was the actual quarry wall itself. So this is where they were digging out those fossils. And if you actually go to the site now, you can clearly see where it was. One interesting thing I noticed is this is a pretty steep hill. So they had to haul those bones from here to the road, transport them to town. And this is actually a little hike we did a while back. So you see, it's a non-trivially steep hill. So yeah, we're talking like giant blocks of rocks they had to carry down this thing. So this is the actual quarry itself with some nice drone pictures. So this is a tailings pile where they just dump stuff over the side. This is where the original excavations were. And you can see the back side of the quarry wall. It's somewhat collapsed in now. Here's a better shot of it. All right, so the dinosaurs actually found here, the fun stuff. So this is Diplodocus longus. This was named double beam by Marsh because its bones are actually somewhat forked a little bit and it has somewhat of a beam, like a tube beam. I don't know. I really don't know why I said beamed. It's really weird. He's named some stuff, some weird stuff. So this, I can't find any recreation of, but this is Smetanosaurus agilis. is previously named Morsilus agilis by Marsh. It's been since renamed like a lot of things. This is Haplocanthosaurus. These are actually pretty relevant to Garden Park. There's a really excellent one that we'll talk about in a minute that came out of here. So this is Brachiosaurus. So this was originally misnamed and its skull was used for recreation of Brontosaurus. And then somebody realized, oh, no, that's the wrong one. So this is Apatosaurus. This one was formerly Brontosaurus. This is another one that was named by Marsh. He named it Deceptive Lizard because its bones had kind of a chevron pattern in the middle. This is Othniel Rex, which is now Nanosaurus Rex. And I think that's actually a pretty funny name because these are really short little critters. But these were found there. These are actually an Ornithian. Like I said, those dinosaurs that have that bird hip structure and they kind of look shorter to the ground. Then we have Roadkill. That's what this one's named. This was the first Stegosaurus stenops, and they called it Roadkill because that's what it looks like. It looks like it got smashed. Then we have Ceratosaurus. This is a theropod, this walking on its hind legs, and these are clearly predators. Then we have some turtles. They found some turtles there. I believe this one is, let me make sure that I got this one right, Dunochelys whiting. And then this one is Glyptops plicantulus. This one's been found at several places in Garden Park. Then we have this. This is the only known example of this species. This is a Docodont. It's a mammal, actually. And it probably looks something like this. So it's kind of cute looking. All right, then we got a crocodile because why not? We already got other cool things. Let's throw in a crocodile. And a fun fact, some of the bones that you find, especially in marsh quarry, but in some other ones, are slightly radioactive. They contain a coating of uraninite. We call this foreshadowing as to what else is in this area. All right, so let's move on to the Cope quarries. So Cope, his rival, recruited a guy by the name of Ormel Lucas, and they set up several small quarries in the Garden Park area. So this is Cope right here working at his desk, obviously. And this is Lucas. So this is, if you saw on that previous map, let me go back a couple slides. They had two main quarries. They had one called the Fort and then one called the Nipple. And they had a couple others nearby. But Lucas actually had a cabin that he built after living out of a tent for some time. Him and his brother built a small cabin. And the remains of that cabin are still out there. It's a little hard to see. And the first time I came across it, I didn't know what the heck it was. But you can see the outline of it. It's kind of the walls where it is. And if you look in the center of it, you can find some black bones. And that's because they're charred because the cabin burnt down. And it probably had the bones inside of it or they were right next to it. So Lucas lived out there. Him and the crew excavated stuff for Cope. And Cope and Marsh were trying to out-publish and out-identify dinosaurs. This was their big rivalry. Marsh was more about quality of publication, and Cope was about trying to publish as much as possible. So this map is based on the original one that Cope drew the time he went out to the quarry area. It's a little hard to decipher, I'm not going to lie. So I'll show you this again. So this is a better representation of where they actually excavated some of the stuff. So this is the Fort Quarry. This is where they excavated a Camarasaurus. This is the Nipple Quarry. And if you actually been on the site, this sticks up pretty well over the terrain. It's also called Cerulean Hill. And this is why. This is an excavation they did right there at that site. This is another Camarasaurus. This is another recreation that Kenneth Carpenter did. And you can see this is where it used to be a stream channel, and this is where the bones were deposited. This is also a stream channel. It's not the same, it's not in the same layers as the Marsh Quarry, but similar concept. Here's another spot that they excavated some of those bones out there, one of the other quarries that was marked in red. And this is some of the stuff they end up finding out there. So this right here is a Camarasaurus. I actually have I believe I have a tooth from one over there that you guys can look at later. Actually, I think that's a tooth I found up at this quarry. So they excavated several Camarasaurus out of there. So this is another thing they excavated. This was another large sauropod. There's a funny story about this one. So this is what was called Amphicelius fragimilis. It's now been reclassified as, oh God, I hope I don't butcher this name, Marapunosaurus. The story about this is they excavated this, and it is supposedly the biggest dinosaur that's ever existed. Cope drew the sketch right here, and this is a diagram of his size versus the bone. The bone's missing. It's never materialized. So, yeah. This is Dan Grenard standing next to a replica of the Amphicoelius. So if this did exist, this is absolutely massive. This is one bone of one vertebrate, one backbone. Another one that was there was Camptosaurus. This was another one of our little ornithians. This one, ironically, being excavated here was named originally by Marsh. So it was excavated here and Marsh named it. There was possibly another one called Dryptosaurus, but I couldn't find any definitive evidence was there. Again, we have Allosaurus. Several Allosaurus have been found here, and I love this picture. And I want to say this is at Rocky Mountain Museum, but you got the actual skeleton and then what they actually look like. And another crocodile, Glyptos. Oh wait, no, sorry, my bad. Amphicotylus lucasi. So this one was actually named for that quarry because it's exclusive to there. And then the Glyptos turtle. And Cope, like I said, was trying to publish as much as he could. Meanwhile, Marsh was trying to identify a lot of stuff while he could. This picture was taken in 1896, I believe. Right at the end of Cope's life, this is one of the last pictures that was ever taken of him. And up until the day he died, he went broke from this. Like, they both were kind of egotistical, but he ended up going broke from this. And even whenever he was bedridden and like a couple days from dying, he was still trying to work, trying to beat him. So he had some drive, you know. And after he died, this is what his study looked like. So he was working until the end. He was, yeah. Anyways, the results of the bone war were that there's tons of new species named, obviously. I'm trying to find the exact number. Sorry about that. My page is printed all weird. Anyway, Marsh ended up naming more species than Cope. And initially, they both named a lot. But like you saw on the slide, some of them have been renamed. And some of them, like Brachiosaurus, turns out they put the skull on Brontosaurus, and it was actually two different dinosaurs. So let's move on to some other bones that have been found in Cañon City. This is a name some of y'all might recognize. So DeWeese, he is pretty famous here in Cañon City and some other places as well. So he's this absolute unit of a guy. Is pretty well known for being a naturalist, outdoorsman, conservationist. He definitely idolized Teddy Roosevelt, or at least wanted to follow in his footsteps. So this is him with his supposedly world record moose. So he ended up having Dall sheep named after him, as well as helped usher in the Alaskan Game Act of 1902 for the preservation of Alaskan game. He also helped fund a lot of things here in Cañon City. He helped fund a lot of irrigation, a lot of prospects and tourism in Cañon City. So he did a lot in his time, and half of the museum upstairs is dedicated to him. I mean, this is his fireplace that's upstairs in the museum. It's full of bones and petrified wood. I mean, how awesome can you get? So, no, it's really cool. If you haven't seen it yet, I definitely recommend checking it out. So he became interested in fossils because they're around here, and him and some other people went out and found some bones. So they excavated some bones with help from somebody named Figgins from Denver Museum of Natural Science, and they ended up excavating a Diplodocus longus. I'll show you a picture in just a sec, but you can see how they have the vertebrae numbered, so they know which order to put them back in. So they knew what they were doing, thankfully. Here's them excavating some more of the bones from it. And I thought this was pretty neat. This is how they hauled them out of there. And it's not trivial where the site is. Let me put it to you that way. It's pretty hilly. So this is a replica skull that's upstairs, but this is basically what he excavated, Diplodocus longus. That's a vertebrate of it. That's kind of what they look like in real life. It looks kind of cool. So yeah, these were obviously sauropods, herbivores. Their teeth were made, if you notice, they're blunt, made for grounding of plant matter. And so that's the DeWeese Diplodocus. It's currently in Denver Museum of Natural Science. So let's move on to Cleveland-Lloyd quarry. If you're driving along Garden Park, this one is right alongside the right side of the road, kind of where the little bathroom is. So Edwin Delfs and several high school students traveled to Utah and Cañon City and elsewhere in Colorado for a Western geology field excursion. Well, during this, they came across some geology field students from Louisiana State University, and they gave them a tip on where some bones were in Garden Park and gave them a basic map of it. And they ended up finding where the bones were, and there wasn't something there. So this is where the actual quarry is. Like I said, if you're coming to Garden Park, this is where that little picnic area is. So this is how they excavated. Pro tip, if you ever need to excavate bones, don't do this. Do not do this. Seriously, like timbering under these boulders, actually go to the site now, this upper layer is completely fallen down and still like crumbling. But this is how they did it. So like I said, it was a bunch of high schoolers and stuff. So they did reasonably well for people who'd never done this before. There was a concern at the time of local uranium claim staking, somebody staking this site while they were trying to excavate. So Delfs actually went to the county clerk and staked this as a claim for himself, and he called it sauropod, SAWROPOD. So yeah, he did. It's pretty funny. But so they ended up hauling out, well, here's them preparing it. They ended up hauling out several plaster jackets where you wrap the bones in the rock and plaster and floating them on a raft across 4 Mile Creek, which in the summertime sometimes floods. So they had to put up with flooding and gnats and everything else. He said the heaviest plaster jacket they had to bring out was 2,500 pounds. So that's non-trivial to float across the creek. So they worked for several years from 1955 to 1957. And what they excavated is Haplocanthosaurus delfsi, and here it is right here in the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, and it's called Happy. That's the name of this, Happy, because it's Haplocanthosaurus. If you go to their website right now, as of like a week or so ago, they started taking Happy down to do some restoration work, and they're putting up a Diplodocus replica called Dippy. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So that's Happy. That's the most complete Haplocanthosaurus. It's the only adult specimen found, and it's the only one that's able to be displayed. And it was found in Garden Park. So Kessler, some of you people might recognize this name as well. So Professor Frederick Kessler was he was a high school teacher who would take his students out to Garden Park, which is awesome. I wish my teachers did that. So they would go out in the field and he would give lessons, and they'd also just go out and explore some of the area. And, occasionally they would come across fossils. He also established the Cañon City Geology Club. And at one point he was the curator of this museum that we're sitting in, or I'm standing, you guys are sitting. So at one point they uncovered a Camarasaurus, but Camarasaurus vertebrate, I believe that's just the tail parts what they found. He contacted some people at Denver Museum of Natural Science, and they really didn't have the means to excavate it. So they told him just to cover it up with tarp, and those bones are missing. Like nobody knows where they were, or if they were stolen or whatnot. So unfortunately, those are gone. But his most famous find is this. This is a almost complete Stegosaurus that they managed to find and had help excavating in 1937. And this is the Colorado State fossil. Right here, this is the Kessler Stegosaurus. It is currently in the Denver Museum of Natural Science on display. So if you go there, you get to see it. It became the state fossil in 1982, and there it is in the Denver Museum of Natural Science next to an Allosaurus skeleton. They also found some ornithopoda fragments, so another small little Ordovician dinosaur, and some more turtle, because turtles are everywhere. Another extremely significant quarry. This one is the small quarry. So in 1992, Kenneth Carpenter on the left, a very important guy as far as dinosaurs, especially in this area, and his assistant, Brian Small, and some other volunteers with Denver Museum of Natural Science came down here during a regular excursion to look for bones, and ended up coming across some up off of Garden Park, and they began excavating. Well, once they began excavating, they realized they had a really complete dinosaur. They had a lot of material in place here. So a lot of volunteers were working like this. You see, they're working with small picks and brushes. They are being as delicate as possible. This is how you properly excavate, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of work. to remove it, they had to completely remove this chunk of rock with the bones in it. So they recruited Bill Tezak of Tezak Quarries here to help drill under it. And after 1,500 man hours of work, they managed to completely separate it. Now came plaster jacketing it. And to do that, they'd take the burlap with plaster and wrap it around, just keeping a hard case. People had to actually get up under there and quickly apply plaster before it dried. So underneath where they got it timbered up. So this is, like I said, this is a non-trivial thing. And this is how they started to get it out of here. So the problem became you have this several ton block of rock in a pretty remote little arroyo near Garden Park. So how do you get it out of there? Somebody came up with the idea of, why don't we ask people at Fort Carson to bring in a helicopter? So they did. The base commander approved a helicopter crew to use a CH-47 Chinook, which, if you don't know, it's a cargo helicopter used for lifting vehicles and artillery in combat, to fly in. They welded bolts to the raft and the plaster jacketed block, attached cables, and yeah, they picked it up. So this was actually over the lifting weight of the Chinook, so they had to get more approval how to do it, but they lifted it, put it on a flatbed, and brought it to Cañon City, where it started its journey of revealing itself. So Cañon City at the time didn't really have any place that was good for prepping out the fossils. So the Abbey, the historic Abbey down the road, they got the winery there and the church. At the time, it was still a church, and one of the monks there had a interest in archaeology and science. And so he let them use a garage over by where the winery is. Not ideal, but you know what? It's best you can get, and it worked. So lots of hours went into starting to prep it out and get it ready for, revealing the bones in it and how complete it is. So in 1995, the Dinosaur Depot, which used to be here in town, unfortunately closed, was completed, and they transported it over there where they could better prep it out with an actual lab where they actually prep out fossils. And after a year, this is what it started to look like. So it's starting to look pretty good. So this work continued until 1996, where it was moved to Denver Museum of Natural Science. And this fossil is right upstairs. Well, not the original. This is a replica. There's 3 replicas made. This is the fossil known as Miss Spike. This is one of the most complete Stegosauruses. It's 80% complete, and it is an extremely important fossil for paleontology. The reason why Miss Spike is important is, first off, it's really complete. Second off, the neck armor is preserved. The plates are preserved somewhat in their original orientation, because the Stegosaurus is obviously a really weird looking dinosaur. And the reason why some of its anatomy is the way it is really confusing. Why does it have the plates? Why does it have the spikes on its tail? And since this one is really well preserved, we were able to see some of the orientation. The plates weren't lined up in a straight line like previously before. They were kind of staggered on the back. And the spikes on the tail were always thought to be sticking up, but we can see they're kind of sticking out to the side. So Miss Spike was really well preserved. It's a Stegosaurus that died from an infection. So died in infection in some mud, and she was extremely well preserved. And after a couple of years of work, now we have this awesome fossil. Oop. Okay, so this was another one that was found at the small quarry, just a few bones of it, but this is a pterodactylid. Its name is actually Capodactylus inspiratus. And this one was named Garden Finger. Its name means garden finger because it was found in Garden Park. But in 1996, this was named by Gerald Harris and Kenneth Carpenter, and it had an 8-foot wingspan. So, that was pretty cool. I didn't actually expect there to be pterodactylids here. All right, so let's go and talk about specifically the Stegosaurus, because we've talked a little bit about how cool they are, and it is the state fossil. So let's talk about the Jurassic Classic. So the Stegosaurus' skull, they have this little thingy right here called the predatory bone, and it's thought that that was used for clipping off vegetation because they were short to the ground and ate little bushes and shrubs and other little things close to the ground. Its teeth were like this. It's got those ridges for grinding up vegetation. But one more thing about them is with their skull structure, their jaw was basically only able to move up and down. So how they actually chewed and digested plant material is not fully understood, and we don't have any alive to tell. It's probably a good thing the dinosaurs aren't still alive. So they possibly traveled in herds because there have been juvenile and adult tracks found in close proximity to each other. And the big striking thing about the Stegosaurus is these giant bony plates on its back. And this is the biggest point of conjecture as to what the heck these things are for. There's several different interpretations. Some people think they might have been armor, which would make sense. Giant spiky bones sticking out your back. Yeah, that's pretty good deterrent. Some might have said it might have been a heat sink or for a way for it to collect sunlight to regulate its body's temperature. It might have been used for intimidation, possibly. Might have been used for mating. It was thought that maybe they could circulate blood through them and change the colors of them, kind of like blushing. I guess that's how they figured it'd work. But it's also quite possible as multifunctional. It might have been one or two or a combination of those. Okay, so funny story about this is 100% true. The spikes on the tail. There was this cartoonist called Gary Larson. He wrote The Far Side. Yeah, everybody knows about that. So he drew this comic about these cavemen. Of course, cavemen and dinosaurs didn't live at the same time. And he says this is what we call a thagomizer in honor of Thag Simmons, who apparently was killed by it. Kenneth Carpenter saw this and was the first one to adopt the term thagomizer because we realized we don't actually have a name for the spikes on the tail. It has stuck. It's officially called the thagomizer now. Yes, yeah. So that is a thagomizer. And that's another point of conjecture is what were the spikes actually used for? It's highly probably used for defense because it's a sharp spike. And this is an actual Allosaurus vertebrate with a big thagomizer spike through it. So yeah, it's quite possible they used for that. Here's another one where an Allosaurus pelvis was stabbed with one of the spikes and it got infected and died. So it's probably used for defense. And I believe there's also been a study of damage to the existing number of Stegosaurus spikes, and it's actually a non-trivial amount have damage to them. So again, there's the Kessler Stegosaurus and Allosaurus right there. So this quite possibly could have been a real scene. And in real life, it probably looked like that. So that's actually a Ceratosaurus, but it messed around and found out. All right, so let's go to the Cretaceous a little bit forward in geologic time. So the Cretaceous up here, we were talking about the Jurassic previously. So during the Cretaceous, the Western U.S. was covered in the Western Interior Seaway. Colorado was pretty much completely underwater at this point. One thing to notice, though, it wasn't always just static water there. Usually you get periods of water gradually, they'll rise, fall, rise, fall, rise, fall. This is typical in geologic time. So occasionally you will get some sediments that do have terrestrial animals like mammals or dinosaurs or anything else is walking on land. Let me flip the other one. So this is typically what the Cretaceous looked like. So we have, like I said, not too dissimilar from the modern ocean. We do have these large rudous clams in a lot of places. We have some corals, some ammonites and nautiloids and fish and sharks. And mosasaurs, which were the apex predator time, they were giant swimming lizards and they ate everything and they got to be massive. So these are cool. Plesiosaurs as well. So thankfully these don't exist anymore. Oh my God. But what we find typically here in the Cretaceous sediments of Colorado, ammonites, unfortunately this picture is a little blurry, but ammonites were basically a cephalopod similar to a squid with a shell on it. And their shells were chambered. I have a couple of them up here. You can come take a look at the chambers of them. As they grew, they would grow another chamber with some really intricate patterns that interlock the chambers. We also get stuff like anoceramic clams. These are everywhere here, everywhere, especially in the hogbacks. And Temple Canyon, you can find these a lot in Temple Canyon and the hogbacks. Another thing that we find in the Cretaceous is this is a dinosaur trackway that's out in Temple Canyon. It's a little hard to see on this picture because photographing it is a little hard if the light doesn't hit it just right. But you can see we got a footprint right here. We got another one over here and another one over here, and there's one over here. This is it looking at it from the bottom. You can kind of see them a little bit better. This is one up close, so you can see where you have a dinosaur walked across it and squished that mud out and it hardened up, and now we have a trackway. That's also in Cretaceous stuff. This is another spot in Temple Canyon where we have some really unique Cretaceous stuff for this area. So we have these little beds of shale here, and I've only found this stuff in this one spot. This only spot I know of in the area with it. But these are plant fossils, actually. Like this was like at the time when these were fossilized, it's like a lake environment. This is possibly a piece of a fish. I don't know. This is clearly a plant leaf, and there's some little bits of other plant matter over here. It's hard to discern what some of this is because it's so fragile and easily breaks off. Here's some more of it. There's also been some insects and pretty intact ferns found here. All right, so Skyline Drive. This is pretty well known to everybody local here. It's a kind of a tourist thing. We have Skyline Drive, which is a Dakota hogback that looks over Highway 50 as well as Cañon City, and you can drive all the way up it, and you know it's pretty tourist thing. It's pretty cool though, don't get me wrong. But right along there, we have these tracks. These are also from the Cretaceous in the Dakota Formation. So it might be a little hard to see, but there it is. So that is a dinosaur track, quite possibly by Ankylosaurus. So it walked across here and left these tracks. And now you see them here. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a few of them. So there's probably a few animals. The way these form is, it, like I said, it stepped there, squished the mud and whatnot, left its imprint. And then as more stuff got deposited over it later, like some more sand came along and filled it in, this stuff might have decayed away like we see on the hogback. So the original stuff that it stepped into it decayed away, but the stuff that infilled it is still there. So this is actually a cast of the footprint. Yep. So there it is. All right, we're going to shift gears, stop talking about fossils, start talking about mining. This is another really important part of Cañon City area history. So a lot of the mining here was coal camps because coal is a big thing in Colorado. So let's talk about what life in a coal camp or mining town actually was. So Cañon City itself was not a mining town. There was a lot of coal mining here, and there were a couple communities that we'll talk about in the southern part of the city that were small mining communities. So this is Coal Creek. This is a little bit south of here. This was a mining town. It was set up for mining. And a lot of mining towns, you have the town itself is pretty much controlled by the mine company. And in a lot of cases, this was Colorado Fuel and Iron, CF&I, controlled a lot of these mines. So they would have a company store. They would have company housing where you and your family lived. And a lot of times you get paid what's called script, which is basically credit for the company store. And you can't use it outside of that. And you pay them rent, you work long hours. And frankly, it wasn't very good. And a lot of early mining was very, it was hard, and it was very, it was very, how to put it, abusive of the people who did it. So this is a company store down in Rockvale. So you see Colorado Supply Company, and this is where the miners would go to get all their provisions. Like I said, it was usually sometimes done with company script, where the company would just give you credit to use only in their store. This is not all of them, because some of them are underneath other dots. This is a lot of the mines that are here in the area that I've been able to find. So there's everything from coal to copper, uranium, everything here. So we'll go over some more specifically in a second, but right now we're going to focus on coal mining. So this is more of a diagram of modern coal mining, but concept still stays the same. A lot of the coal mining here was done with what's called a room and pillar. So basically you drill down, you see the black right here is the coal seam. You're going to create a room, and you're just going to keep on making kind of a crisscross pattern and leaving these pillars here for structural support. You don't want it caving in on you. Oh my God, that'd be bad. But a lot of this was done back then with manual labor. So with some of the mines around here in Cañon City, there were incline shafts, which means you have a gradually sloping shaft, and then you have different levels where you work out along the ore vein. So you have a crosscut or a drift, depending on what you want to call it. And you got different levels. And in this case, it looks like they have probably a track that goes back up or a conveyor belt that brings the ore up to the top. You can also have ones that use a cage or a skip and brings your ore in there, and you have ore chutes that deposit the ore down to lower levels. So, but like I said, most of them around here were incline shafts. So this is a vertical shaft mine, and this is an incline shaft mine. These are the mains we're going to talk about here. This is also used for just ore in general, but for the coal mines here, this is what a lot of them were. This is how it was done back then. You would drill, you would put in your explosives. Usually back then it was blasting powder, which is a form of black powder. They moved on to more advanced powders because it's a little dangerous, and dynamite itself ain't that safe. But they would blast, they would lay down more rails, they would keep just progressing further in the mine. And it was long, hard work. You had to sit here and drill like a grid of holes, put the explosive in, and then once you blast it out, shovel it out, lay down new track, put up timbering. So that's how all this was done. And it was all done by hand. And when you see how extensive some of these mines were, it is mind-numbing how much work was put into this. So here's a guy breaking off some of that material by hand, and then they would shovel this up and haul it out of the mine, probably via mine cart or conveyor, probably mine cart here, and then dump it on a conveyor belt later. So like I see, this is a room, and then you got the tracks going up to it. This is what's called the face. This is your working face where you're actually drilling and blasting. And with coal mines, you have this thing that usually you sometimes still see today. This is called a tipple. This is where when they brought the mine carts out full of coal, they would have a mechanism, some different mechanisms that would dump the coal out. And then it sorts it into slack, which is your small stuff, your nut and slack. Nut is really tiny coal, and then nut coal, and then lump coal. Lump coal is obviously the biggest. And then that would go on the railroad and be hauled out of there in different carts. There's one tipple still left, kind of near Brookside, but it's really hard to see, and you can't really stop on the road to take a picture of it, unfortunately, because I would throw in a picture there. But this was a structure that you usually would see associated with old abandoned mines. So the coal mines in the Cañon City area. So in Cañon City, we have this area further to the south called Lincoln Park, and we also have Brookside. On this side of Lincoln Park, we have what's called Prospect Heights, which was founded as a mining community. And that's where a lot of the mining in Cañon City happened. Brookside was also where some stuff happened. There's a little bit over here as well, but we're mainly going to focus on this area. So these are the coal mines that were in the Cañon City area, as well as, Temple Canyon, Grape Creek. So the biggest ones were Nonak, number 5, and Prentice Shaft. We're going to talk about those specifically. Brookside had an absolutely massive mine, and Chandler also had a massive mine. And we'll talk about those as well, because they were the biggest in the area. They were the biggest producing mines in the area. Royal Gorge 1 and Royal Gorge 2, Diamond and Hayes, they all produced, Canyon Wolf Park as well produced a decent amount, but it's hard to find information on them at all. So I'm going to mainly focus on the big ones. So this is Prospect Heights. This is on the south side of town. If you're from here, there's a rodeo track, and then the Mercantile Store, which is one of the original buildings, right there. This is where the Nonak mine entrance was. It was actually pretty much this property right here. And best I can tell, Nonak was also called the Rockville number 5 mine. And best I can tell, the number 5 mine's shaft was originally started right here, the portal going into the mine, by, I believe, the Santa Fe Railroad. And they sold the rights to, I want to say Cañon City Coal, and then CF&I, Colorado Fuel and Iron, bought it. So the Prospect Heights Mercantile Store is still there. This was the local, not really company store, because this wasn't a company town. Is where you can go and get all your stuff. It's still there today. It's an antique shop now. There's an original building on the side of the road, right nearby the Mercantile Store. Here's another one. I actually don't know what this building was. And then the jail, the infamous jail that was built in 1906, because Prospect Heights, as well as a spot off the highway near Florence called Hell's Half Acre, were the only places with saloons. A lot of this was dry. So Prospect Heights had several saloons, and they had to build a jail because, people were getting too rowdy. There was a movie star that came here. I don't remember who it was, but he got pretty rowdy at one of the saloons and went outside and started shooting off his revolver, and he had to spend. Who was it? Tom. Okay, yeah, but he had to spend a night in there, so got a little wild. So Prospect Heights also had this right here. This was Sally's Paradise. It's still there. I think it's a hair salon now. But from what I've read, I don't know how true this is. Apparently, they would do some shady things in the former mine tunnels that ran underneath it. And so this is, the blue is basically the area of the Nonak mine where it extended. So the Santa Fe, I believe it's Santa Fe. Correct me if I'm wrong. If somebody actually, I believe it's Santa Fe did most of the work here, came out through here. And this is where they had, I believe this is where they had the tipple. They had load up the rail cars. The entrance to the mine was about right here. Like, so this Prospect Heights. And this is the actual Nonak number mine site. So unfortunately, there's no pictures of inside the mine because it's actually a huge coal mine, like still underneath the town. So this was the coal tipple, and this was some of the miners. And I believe 1942 is when this picture was taken. But the mine operated from 1904 to 1952. The shaft going into it was a 12-degree incline shaft, gently sloping shaft that went down, I believe, a mile. And the coal bed they were excavating was 5 to 6 foot thick. And it was known for being really quality coal. So the coal was really hard and burned really well. It was sold a lot as a consumer good, coal. So they produced 2,001,626 tons of coal throughout its entire production. And it was pretty well known for being one of the safest mines in Southeast Colorado. They had a 30-year streak of no accidents at all, which is pretty much unheard of at this time. So here's another picture of the tip. Well, these were the only pictures I could find of it, unfortunately. Here's another one of them bringing those cars up to be dumped out. And this is, I want to say this is near, this is on the way from the mine somewhere. I don't know if this is in Florence or whatnot, but you can see they got the different coal sorted out. You got your little small stuff, probably your pea coal and your nut coal and your lump coal, your different sizes of coal sorted out on the rail lines. A lot of the coal that was mined in Cañon City went to the steel mills in Pueblo, actually. And you can see the coal was pretty well known for, being from here. So they would actually physically paint it with one of these stencils. So sort it out and paint the coal. Yeah, that's a lot of work. So I actually managed to find the workings map. So this is it. This is Nonak Mine. You can see that is a lot of workings. That is all underneath here. And I kind of got curious as to where exactly it is. So I overlaid it with the actual town. So there it is. So that's where the full extent of it. And what's kind of interesting is about right here in 1968, a sinkhole opened up on the side of the road and had to be filled in. Yeah. So just think about that because it's all still down there. And in 1948, another sinkhole occurred over here, but I don't know if it was because of Nonak, because Nonak doesn't extend much further than this. It might have been because the old Prentice shaft that was worked here. But I believe it was this house right here, as well as the liquor store right there, settled an entire foot. The occupants of the house said they had to pry the doors open because the house twisted so much when it settled. So yeah, that's not good. It also stands to reason that some of the coal would have went to the W.N. Clark power plant, which was here in Cañon City from 1857 until 2014. That is a really good streak. This is an actual picture from 2014 before it closed. No, it's not. So this is originally it was coal-fired power plant. Like I said, it stands to reason they use some locally produced coal because why would you not? It's right there. Let's see. So Chandler Mine, this is further south by a few miles, and this is where Chandler Mine used to be, and this is actually an incredibly important mine for this area, believe it or not just because of its production and the fact that it used to be a town of 600 residents. And you can kind of see on this map, you can see where some of the houses used to be. They had streets, they had schools, they had everything. This was a full-on company town. This is where they would, I believe this is where they would load up the mine carts based on, let's see if this picture right here, that looks like similar tailings pile. If you go out there today, this is all you'll see. Because I went out there last week. That's why there's snow everywhere and it was blowing right in my face. It was windy. This was, I believe, a powder magazine, where they store some of the blasting powder. It might also have been a store because I zoomed in on it with a monocular and there's writing on the side that almost looks like it's a store. I don't know, but this is the only building. There's a few other ruins where there were houses, but they're covered up by the grass. Up on the hill above it, they have this concrete structure that used to hold the water tower. And this is where things get a little dark. So if you know anything about early coal mining in the early 1900s in Southeast Colorado, you know about the 1913, 1914 Southeast Coal Field Wars. So this was a series of protests that happened in 1913, 1914 because the workers got sick of it. They were asking for enforcement of actual 8-hour days, stop being paid in company scripts, and stop being treated like garbage by the mine companies. So what this all culminated in, it's a really awesome historical event. And it's like everything else. There's so many details and so much that led up to it. But to make a very long story short, this all culminated in the southeast fields of Colorado with this little community called Ludlow. So the striking miners set up a small tent community. So they had little streets and everything, and they were striking against the mine companies for better wages, better work hours, and everything else. So they set up this little tent colony, Ludlow, and the strike started to get a little heated between them and the mine companies who started to bring in the Baldwin Felts Detectives Agency, as well as, oh, here's some of the striking miners. You can see that STEM and their families. They also brought in the National Guard, so things were getting a little heated. Well, this all culminated in a event on April 20th, 1914, that started with attempted negotiations between the leader of the guy who was, he's a Greek miner who was helping represent the mine workers in negotiations with the mine company, the National Guard. His name was Lou Tikas. When he went to go meet with the guy who was commanding the National Guard at the time, he was beaten and shot, killed. So after that, also, just before this, the Baldwin Felts built this little armored car they called the Death Special, and at night they would ride through and spray machine gun fire into the tent colony, actually killing, I believe, a child at one point. Well, they raided and burnt down the tent colony, and 20 people died, including 13 women and children who were hiding out underneath their tent. So this obviously caused a huge, it caused a lot of people to just completely lose faith in this protest, and this started what's called the 10-Day War. So for the next 10 days, the striking miners basically made their way across southeast Colorado all the way up to near Denver, burning down mine structures, blowing up mines, and executing mine personnel. It was a very, very contentious part in history. It's actually the largest violent insurrection in American soil since the Civil War. And Chandler played a part in that, believe it or not. So right up here where the water tower was, the National Guard, as well as I believe some mines crew personnel, had a Colt 1895 machine gun nest. And they would spray fire down on the miners who were, as about 1,000 of them came from Rockville to take over Chandler. And they did it. They eventually had a 36-hour gunfight, and they left and basically abandoned the town for the miners. And the miners actually ransacked some of the buildings, but they didn't actually burn down or destroy anything at the actual mine itself. And whenever the federal forces came in a few days later through Trinidad and Cañon City, Chandler was eventually, relinquished. But there was actually, so the power plant that I showed slides of, there's actually a big concern that they were going to try to blow up the power plant. They actually did blow up a Santa Fe Railroad bridge between here and Florence as well. So that was the 10-Day War, and Chandler played a big part in that as well, which, yeah, it was pretty crazy. But Chandler closed down in 1942, and after it closed, the houses were sold off. And this is one right here in Cañon City. This was one of the former mine houses, and it's still there today. Somebody lives in it. So if this is your house, I'm sorry I drove by and took a picture of your house. Actually, this is like right nearby that house that settled whenever they had the sinkhole. It's on the same area. It's pretty neat. It's kind of coincidental. It's in Prospect Heights. So I'm gonna briefly. So this is upstairs. This is a Tyrannosaur footprint that was found in Chandler Mine when they were excavating coal. So this is one of them, and several others are at Denver, but this one's upstairs. It's right upstairs. You can go look at it after this. I'm gonna briefly touch on Brookside because it's here and it was huge. So Brookside had, as far as I know, two large mines. I found the map of all the entrances. If you ever want to look at it, you just ask me. But it was a mining town, encompassed this, and you can still see a lot of the former buildings there. Here's one of the, I believe this was adjacent to a portal, but it's right down where the park is. If you go through Brookside, they have a little community park. Right where the park is where they had the tipple and the railroad where they would haul the coal out. All right, so Empire Zinc. A lot of you probably know what this is, and it's pretty cool talking to a bunch of people here whose family members actually worked here. So Empire Zinc Mill was in operation from 1902 to 1968. They processed ore from Leadville, and it was sent to Chicago to be smelted. And in 1916-17, they added a dry mill and oxide plant to their processing facility, and it increased jobs a lot, which at that time, it was pretty profitable. At this time, in the 1920s, they employed 400 more people, and they opened up a new machine shop, and they were processing 100 carloads of ore a day. And at this time, in 1920s, the workers, depending on your job, you're making $1.50 to $3.50 a day, which at the time is really substantial money. So it partially closed in the 1930s due to the Great Depression, because the Great Depression kind of killed everything. It reopened in 1941, and it started processing ore that was mined up in Gilman. And then it closed again in 1953, reopened in 55, and continued until 1968. And unfortunately, none of the buildings there are still present. So this is where Empire Zinc was located. This is Forge Road right here. This is Prospect Heights. It's on the south part of town. So this is where it formerly was. It's all private land now. Oh, I went back a little bit. It's just a little close in view. I think this is the only building still remaining of the actual mill itself. Yep. So a lot of you probably know what this is. So this is what, there's not many buildings left here, but this is formerly what was Cotter Uranium Mill. So this was a big industrial area, South Canyon City, where they would process uranium into U-308 yellow cake, uranium 308. So whenever they were starting to process stuff here, they operated from 1958 to 1979. One of their initial things they did was actually process waste from the Manhattan Project from St. Louis, Missouri, which if you actually look that up, there's a lot of pollution in that area from the Manhattan Project uranium. But a lot of it was brought here to be processed and disposed of. So it operated up until I believe 2004 is when it was officially shut down. But in even during production, 1984, it was declared a Superfund, which is a environmental cleanup site. Because originally the leach ponds at the site were unlined and it was causing pollution, which is not good, especially nearby an entire city. So Cotter Mill operated for a long time. They would leach out uranium ore brought in via rail. Lots of legal things happen with this. Maybe some of you remember it. It's gone now, but the site is still a Superfund site. That's what it actually looked like during production. That was probably sometime in like the 80s or 90s because they updated with more modern stuff in the late 90s and early 2000s. So it's just picture uranium ore. But basically, I'm going to talk about another little project that happened near Tallahassee Creek, over near Buckskin. North of that, there is a giant uranium ore body that in 1980, there was a Hansen mine project proposed where they were going to try to excavate a 500-foot open pit to start mining this ore body. And what was formerly a small mine called Picnic Tree, that was shot down by locals because of concerns with environmental concerns. There was also another reboot of it that they tried, and it was shelved in 2010. So that ore body's still there. Somebody's going to probably try to mine in the future, but it's there. It's a massive uranium ore body. And there is excuse me. So there's a lot of historical uranium mines around Cañon City. They're mostly small. You're usually not going to find big chunks of ore like this. They're not worth like mining really. It's just coincidental occurrences of uranium. Remember how I said this is foreshadowing with the dinosaur bones? Morrison Formation contains a lot of radioactive material. Some of it's not worth mining though. So that's why, it's here. And in the mid 1900s, a lot of people tried to come here or locals tried to stake claims on land for uranium because they thought it was about to be a next big boom in production. It wasn't, but I found a funny article that a local supply store was sold out of Geiger counters because the amount of people flocking here trying to strike it rich with their little tiny occurrence. It's not even the size of a backyard of uranium. So yeah, it's just something funny. So another thing that was mined here is this mineral called mica, which I have a nice piece of up here. Mica is a sheet silicate mineral where the crystals of it form in these thin sheets. You can see it kind of looks like a book. That's sometimes what mica is called. It's called a book of mica. This is a piece I found up near Cripple Creek. It's cool stuff, but what it's used for, I actually didn't know this before. It's actually, or it used to be, I doubt it is now, is used as a dry lubricant in drilling. So if you know, graphite still uses dry lubricant, but apparently they would crush up mica and use it as well. So really interesting on that. And I've also seen this near Gunnison. There were several mines with mica called lepidolite. It's basically this, but purple, and it's purple because it contains lithium. And at one point that was mined for its accessory mineral content. So it might have other stuff in it that can be valuable. This is feldspar. This is lousy around here. If you've seen granite, you've seen feldspar. That's the pink and feldspar, pink and granite. So feldspar, I didn't know had a lot of uses either, but come to find out, it's used as a flux in ceramics to help lower the temperature it takes for the ceramic to create its own amorphous solid glass that is ceramic. Pretty interesting stuff. That's happened here too. This area, kind of to the west and the north of town, been copper, there's been iron, there's been maybe one or two gold placers, a little bit of everything over time. They're not there anymore because they just weren't that profitable, but it's all happened here. Some uranium as well, like I said. Something kind of cool is this is the backside of the prison, basically where Skyline Drive is now. So it's kind of a little messed up to me. The wall that's around the prison, they made the prisoners mine out the blocks and then build the wall themselves. And I'm like, okay. So yeah, this is them mining out those blocks of sandstone, transporting them via horse-drawn carts. There's part of the wall right there. And then putting up the wall. And this is the actual quarry itself. It's obviously no longer there, but I find it cool. They actually got a few little mine carts for transporting the material. So that was a little quarry they had back there. All right, last mineral thing we're going to talk about, oil. Everybody likes that. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you don't, I don't know. So oil. So Garden Park, actually up there nearby where the dinosaurs were, was the second oil well ever installed in the United States, 1862. This was installed by a gentleman, excuse me, I got the wrong name on here. Sorry. So this well was probably first found by the Ute natives because this is actually what's called an oil seep. This is where oil is literally bubbling out of the ground. So it's possible they used it for something. Can't find any solid proof of that because there's really not any way to tell. So a guy named Gabriel Bowen claimed this in September 1860, and then some guy came on his claim, and that's kind of like not supposed to do that, and dug 4 holes to try to find some oil for himself. 1 hole produced 1 barrel a day, which is slow. So Alexander Cassidy bought his claim in 1862 and sunk the first oil well at this site. And he sold that claim in 1865, and the seep was producing a few barrels a day. I think it was 1 to 3, and they used it for lamp oil and wagon lubricant. They ended up drilling, him and another guy named Isaac Canfield started trying to drill more wells around here because they figured if there's oil here, there's more. So they drilled a well southeast of Cañon in 1880, 1881, and they found oil at 1,445 feet depth. And this was the Florence oil field they just discovered. And its peak production in the 1890s, it was making 3,000 plus barrels a day of oil. So this right here is the one in Garden Park. And this is Professor Kessler, same guy that discovered the Stegosaurus and was here at the museum. This was the original casing that they put around the oil well. Just erosion had exposed it, and it was preserved because it was obviously soaked in oil. Apparently he took part of it and brought it back here, but it's vapor. It's nowhere to be found. This is actually where it was. I had a hard time actually finding where the heck it was, but there's a monument for Oil Creek, is what Oil Creek used to be, what 4 Mile Creek used to be. And it's slightly directly across from the monument. It's a little bit across and to the right, but that little arrow is where it was. It's covered up by trees, but that's where the first oil seep is. It's obviously private land, so no trespassing. Here's a picture of the Florence oil field. So this one was producing, and if you're like me and try to drive down to Coal Creek and get lost and almost end up halfway to Hardscrabble Mountain, they're still drilling oil down there. So they're still drilling and all that oil. So the original oil well in Garden Park, they were capped in 1990s and the shaft was filled in. Now it's private land. All right, so we're going to switch gears one more time and talk about the last thing that built Cañon City, bricks. This is something I didn't know I'd be learning about, but yeah, bricks and geology have a lot in common because bricks are made out of dirt. So I actually had to learn some new stuff for this. I asked a friend of mine who's getting his master's in ceramics. I was like, hey, what does all this stuff mean? So if you haven't noticed, I have some bricks that were made here up here. So with the bricks that were made here is what was called refractory clays. And what these are high silicon aluminum content clays, mostly in the kaolinite clay group. And these make fire bricks, which are sturdy bricks, which are resistant to heat and deformation associated with heat and pressure. They would mix them with flint clays, which was, from what I understand, it's a little hard for me to discern what the actual true definition of them was. I assume it's like everything else, it varies a little bit. But they're usually associated with coal beds, and it's a flint-like clay that's really rich in kaolin, which is an aluminosilicate mineral. And Ganister was also mined here, which is just a fine-grained quartzose sandstone, and that was also used to make brick. For comparison, I have up here a regular brick. I suppose it's a regular brick. It's red and it's a brick. And I have one of the fire bricks that was made here originally. And if you look at them real close, you can kind of tell a little bit difference in just how they're composed. It's very slight, but if you come up here and take a look later. So ever since literally since Cañon City started, there was bricks here. There was people making bricks and there were people mining clay for the bricks. A lot of the clay in this area was mined along the hogbacks because if you remember, those hogbacks were mainly exposures of Dakota sandstone marine sediments, which is a lot of clays that happen to be rich in a lot of silicate minerals. So here's those hogbacks right here, these big ridges of those tilted Dakota sandstone beds. And usually a lot of the clay mining tends to occur right around the bases of them. Or if, like in the case of some of the ones I'll show you in a minute, it just went straight down and made shafts and hauled out the clay. So this is actually a mine near Penrose, or quarry, I should say, that's owned by Summit Brick in Pueblo. This is still active. I can't remember if I took this picture or if a colleague did, but this basically looks like it's really fine red powdery clay, but they're using this stuff for making bricks to this day. And Summit Brick actually is a pretty big company. I didn't actually understand how big they were. So here's something else I had to learn about. Whenever you're firing ceramics or glass or bricks even, you have to fire them. You can't exactly just throw it in an oven and call it good, right? You have to cook it at a certain time, certain temperature, so that way the minerals harden up and hold together just right. And they have these things in ceramics called cones. Like I said, I never knew about this before. But based upon the number on it depends on what temperature and what length of time you can heat it before it starts deforming. And those basically help you determine how hard or the strength of your brick. And it just depends on the number for it. And you can heat it at this temperature for this hour. This was going to be, it's a little over my head. I mean, I work with dirt. I work with clays, but I don't work with them in this capacity. But this is how they would fire bricks as well. So this is a kiln that's in Temple Canyon, or actually Ecology Park, which is in the Temple Canyon area. There's several of them around here. I've seen one, I believe, near Florence. These were created by early settlers here to fire ceramics. So these have been, they've been firing ceramics for a long time here, making bricks and everything else. So the ones that I found, the brick manufacturers that I found in Cañon City were these ones. You got Catlin Brickyard, which was the first, Cañon City Brick and Tile, Diamond Fire Brick, Freeman, Jewett, Standard, and Lockley Christie. So unfortunately, there's not many pictures of any of them at all. These are the only ones I could find pictures or locations of. So Catlin Brickyard was over here off of, see, Catlin Brickyard was over there off of, I believe that's 5th Street, I believe. Let's see. And they use clay from Temple Canyon area to make bricks, and they would make 5,000 bricks a day at their highest capacity. They opened originally in 1872, and a big thing they would utilize was the local prison, which is right over here. The inmates would just march over here and go work for the day. That was like a job a lot of the inmates had, was making bricks at Catlin Brickyard. Unfortunately, I don't have the brick yard, but this is Mr. Catlin's yard right here. This is his house. It really is still here in Cañon City. This is his original house that he built. This is the only picture I could find related to him besides a picture of him himself. But he was one of the early founders or one of the early people that moved here, and he happened to own a heck of a lot of land here. And like I said, he had the brick yard, and I believe he had a couple other endeavors he engaged in. But they would mine clay out of here in Temple Canyon, make bricks. Unfortunately, this is the only one I have a picture of the original plant for. Cañon City Brick and Tile. So Cañon City Brick was on 16th Street, north of Main Street. It started in 1895 and operated for 20 years making bricks. Here's some examples of one. Actually, one's right there. That's one of them. So many different variations of bricks. There's a Cañon City. There's the ones on the table right there. We got Diamond Fire Brick. They were over where the ceramics, I'm trying to think of the actual name, DFI, I believe, ceramics, DRI. They were over there. They opened in 1900 on 9th Street. And in 1949, they got bought over by Lockley Christie. Here's some of their products. And I want to say they called this one Flint Lock because it was made using a lot of that flint clay that I mentioned. And one thing that I've noticed with these bricks is some of them have a variation with a letter or a number. And when I got to looking at modern catalogs of modern brick companies, I think that these were bricks meant for different purposes. Like one might be meant for external structure. One might be meant for like stress resistance, like for heavy loads. I believe that's what it was, but these are about the only things I can find left of this. There's hardly any information about these companies, really. Freeman, I could not find hardly any info on. Jouett, this one I found a few of their bricks. There's one Jouett fire brick right there in the cabinet behind you guys too. So they were around. They're standard. I couldn't find much except for, ironically, I found more information about their clay mines than I did their actual place. Luckily, Christie, these people took over Diamond Fire Brick in 1949, and then they burned down in 1951 and then ended up rebuilding their plant. There is a photo out there of their building, but it is under copyright, so you can Google it and find it yourself. I can't put it in this slideshow. And these, I call these mystery bricks. I don't know what company made these, but I find more of these than anything. There's one right there. They stand for Royal Gorge. And they come in many different varieties. So this one says arch spec. Like I mentioned, they probably made different bricks for different applications. And they use different mixtures of clay and flint clay. So I don't know who made those, but these are the clay mines that were around Cañon City. So we have the Current Creek Placer, which was operated by Jouett, and also Vernon St. John. He was an early person here who delved into some of the brick making business. Let's see. There's McIntyre Open Pit Mine. That one was operated by Standard Fire Brick. Like I said, I couldn't find anything about them except for their mine that they operated. River Clay Mine was also operated by Standard Fire Brick. That one was literally on the riverbank over there. That one didn't last long. It was only in 1944. And it was the lower 1/3 of the Granero shale is what they were mining. And usually these mines, they're mining out what's called the Glencairn clay, the Glencairn shale clay of the, sorry, it used to be the Purgatoire Formation, but that's no longer existent. It's now completely its own. It's the Glencairn Formation. Anyways, so they were actually mining out a different formation. It was a little bit more sandy from what I understand. So they got low-grade refractory clay out of it. Yeah, very short-lived stripping operation. Skyline Drive, that hog back that Skyline Drive's on, they excavated a lot of clay out of there between the different companies. Actually, right nearby Skyline Drive, there used to be, I believe it's like a 200-foot mine shaft that went straight down, and somebody fell in it one time, so they had to cover it up. And that was from one of the clay companies. I believe it was actually, let's see who, I believe it might have been Diamond actually did that one. Anyways, so that was, yeah, it was Diamond and Jouett mine, that one, yep. So Climax Mine up here, which is on the very end of Skyline Drive, that one was done by Pioneer Brickworks, who took over Jouett's in 1946, 1948, as well as Deer Hill Mine and Diamond Flint Mine were both operated by Diamond. And that was taken over by, let's see. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Yeah, so those were taken over in 1950 by Lockleed Christie whenever they bought them out. That's pretty much it. If you guys want to ask questions, yeah, I got some more pictures that we can go through if you have specific questions on any of that stuff. I want to thank everybody for attending because this was actually pretty fun to put together. Like I said, I have some new things for me. And I got a few little disclaimers. Stay out, stay alive. It's a phrase. Don't go in abandoned mines because they are extremely dangerous. A lot of old mine shafts have a lot of very toxic gases in them. Even whenever they're active, people died of that. The cave-ins, all that stuff. So don't go in abandoned mines. Stay out of those. Vertebrate fossils and archaeological artifacts, they're in public land, and if you take those, it's a federal offense. Obviously, don't touch toxic or radioactive rocks. I don't think anybody should have to be told that, but yeah. Yeah. And yeah, and just respect private property and mineral rights. And I want to thank the Royal Gorge Regional Museum for letting me stand up here and talk to you guys for like an hour. And also Cañon City, who also let me do this. And it was really cool again to help kick off the second centennial. And Bureau of Land Management, who I also work with for helping provide some of these pictures and also just access to some of these areas. Yeah. So yeah, y'all can ask questions if you want. I think there's a question on the Zoom. Yeah. Hmm?
And got buried. What was the time from when that started to when that river wasn't flowing? That millions of years or hundreds of years? Was dinosaurs just all in one spot, or
Pretty much they're so they're pretty much concentrated in that one area, because if you look at even a modern river, You have the inside bin, which is it's called your cut bank because usually you get sediment eroding there because the water's flowing faster. On the outside edge, you got lower pressure, lower flow of water, and sediment tends to accumulate there. And what's happened is those bones are getting stuck in that outside bin of the river because it's just flowing a little bit slower. Now, as far as the time frame of when that happened, I don't know. I guess it depends on how fast the river was flowing, and for it to carry bones. It would have been, let's see, because they were all late Jurassic, so it could have been hundreds of years, could have been thousands of years, but considering they're all clustered in that one spot, it probably wasn't much more than a few hundred years, if not even sooner. And since they're bones, obviously larger piece of material, harder to move. So since we're seeing these large bones that were moved downstream, it might have just been during like a period of flooding, like flash flood or something, where you get a lot of water moving downstream. Who knows? But they're there. So they're there now. Oh, yeah, there's, as far as active excavation, no. A lot of you can still find bones out there all the time. I actually have some that are educational specimens. Obviously don't take bones off public land, but it's mostly tiny fragments like that. And you do occasionally find large fragments. Like I think I had something that's all right. But yeah, they you occasionally find those, but is there more out there? Yeah, probably. I mean, Garden Park's big, and a lot of the same beds that are weathering out those dinosaurs are all over this area. It would make sense that there's more that we just haven't seen, or that are on, private land that people just don't want to do anything with. So it makes sense. So yeah.
From your perspective and your training,
Yeah.
trace fossils out there, Indian springs and such. How is it that something like that finite, that kind of quality, what would have happened in your opinion to keep that in that position?
The exact right amount of right things happen at the right time, basically. Like it's incredible that they're preserved so well at that site because they're preserved so well. Everything just happened to get covered up and harden with such a fine grained material that it preserves such a small the finer qualities of everything. It was probably more of like a silt or a clay sediment that covered it up really quickly after they were put down. Like I said, it's just the right circumstance, the right time. That's literally every fossil that's been fossilized. It's just a matter of right circumstances, right time.
We've seen them out there before.
Yeah.
They're so small.
Oh, they're incredible. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm trying to read them from here. Change some more. Yeah, sure. Read it to me because.
My mother was born and raised there. I visited my grandparents a number of times and never knew any. Cañon City could have giant fossil tourism industry as well as
Because nobody's paid me yet. No, I'm kidding. So there has been a small tourism with it in the past, especially like during the excavation of those dinosaurs. There was a little bit of tourism, but there somewhat is a tourism. If you go up to Garden Park, the Marsh Quarry, there's a trail going to, you can walk to it. The Cleveland Quarry is right there. But as far as like a publicized tour of everything, I don't know if it's just hasn't been done because it's just, I don't know how to put it without saying like some people are going to be like bad, and the more well-known things get known about, you somewhat open up that avenue, I suppose, which is, I don't know. There have been a lot of fossils stolen from Garden Park even up until the modern day. And there's a petroglyph in Garden Park somebody spray painted over, which it gets me mad too. But it's stuff like that. There's always going to be people that do that stuff, and I don't know how to put it. Like tourism is not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just tourism. It's just what it is. But I mean, it could be a good thing for like your local economy, but I don't know if it's just because of this area just hasn't. I also think it's just people's interests. Like some people just don't care about the stuff. They're not interested in it, which is fine. But
there are a lot of dinosaur bones that they found in other places, like in Denver, and I think other parts of the country as well.
yeah, so the Cleveland-Lloyd quarry, that Haplocanthosaurus, that's like I said, in Cleveland Museum, and they're currently taking it down. There are some stuff here from the Smithsonian, in the Smithsonian as well. But like I said, just some people don't have, or they just don't, if they do have an interest, they just haven't heard about it yet, I guess. I really don't have a solid answer as far as the tourism part goes. Unfortunately, I don't know. Sure. Yeah.
Dinosaur depot that was here.
Hmm?
And they closed down, but they, probably 20 years ago, they had big plans to put a big visiting center out there in Barton Park. I've
Mhm.
seen the blueprints. I'm not sure what happened. It's usually not.
Yeah, that too.
So that may be why, but it would have been a fantastic place to go visit. You could go right to where they are quarried. So there's been efforts.
Yeah. And there have been efforts to excavate, not so much recently. I believe the last effort to look around here was 2004 by Denver, I believe. But like I said, there's still probably stuff here. I mean, why wouldn't there be? It's just money and time and finding people who are interested enough to volunteer to help. But
Well, you did a little, well, quite a bit
Mhm.
of activities. in
Yeah.
here, and all the minerals and rare fossils, coal,
cool. That's a big one.
oil, great farm district here. And a lot of, something happened in this donut hole that they call this,
Yeah.
that all of this stuff has showed up here.
Yeah, this area is really truly incredible about how much stuff has been here, not just geologically, but historically. I'm a big history nut as well. Like the Ludlow massacre, that's something that's really interesting to me because not a lot of people know about it, and historically it's pretty important. But Cañon City alone has a little bit of everything. It's got. Mhm. Yeah. I want to say there were different ages. I don't know. I think they were younger than Jurassic. I want to say they were either Cretaceous or just over the boundary into the Paleogene, more recent stuff. But they weren't super old. But oh no, no. Um, the Carboniferous period. Yeah, that was I believe that's older than the coal seams that are here. I believe the coal seams are a lot younger. But coals just form organic matter, just gets compressed and squished, and it starts forming petroleum organic stuff, and then you get coal and oil and natural gas and other things. Usually it's swamps. That's usually what turns into peat and lignite and coal and oil. So, any other questions on the Zoom?
With all these defunct quarries, what is the chance of there being even more fossils in and or around those historic quarries?
Like I said, I'd like to hope there's a lot more out there, and I would love to see more efforts to excavate it. But it just like the tourism thing, it also just comes down to money and interest. So if you're not interested in it, you're not going to help do it. And if you don't have the money for it, or don't want to throw the money towards it. Okay, cool. Any other questions for everybody else? And like I said, I got a few things up here. I got like Stegosaurus models, some ripple marks, the bricks, drill bit from mining and all that stuff, and the mica mineral. I mean, if you guys just want to check it out, it's up to you. Oh, there's some eggshell fragments over there too from Garden Park. There was a few dinosaur eggshell pieces that were found up there. From theropods, actually. Theropods nested like birds do. So, yeah, they did. The eggs that were found there. Yeah, theropods tend to lay them in eggs. Theropods, sauropods. Sauropods are kind of goofy in that way. They lay their eggs and just walk away, like turtles do, sort of. It's kind of weird, but yeah, that was the one in Denver is from here. I couldn't find any pictures of it, unfortunately. I was going to try to include it, but
Well, going back to the relationship between modern birds, that's great. Like them. But, anyway, when you were talking about Stegosaurus with the fatty,
Mhm.
the jaws just open and close.
Mhm.
A cow grinds.
right.
Maybe that's what the gastroliths was, that they would swallow.
So as far as I know, gastroliths, the gut stones were only used by sauropods. As far as is known right now, was just sauropods. And actually I didn't read anything about stegosauruses. Not to say they didn't, but there's not a whole lot of intact stegosauruses, right? Most of them came from here in Garden Park. So. Yep. So. Yeah. Yeah, y'all, you guys are welcome. That was pretty fun. So